Hi everybody, welcome along to this very special episode of The Dispatches. Originally it was going to be an episode of The Dispatches with Dieuwe, but as you are familiar, or certainly those who tune in regularly are anyway, The Dispatches with Dieuwe is normally an audio podcast, and this is not an audio podcast, this is a special video podcast. And not only that, but we've actually got a third guest in the show with us today, and that is William McGimpsey. And the reason why we recorded this special episode was because we wanted to talk about the current hot button debate of the moment that is really starting to be targeted against conservative thinkers, is the accusation that they are actually woke right. And this is something that the likes of Konstantin Kisin and James Lindsay and others, who have made valuable contributions to the current cultural moment in recent years, have suddenly started fostering, and very vociferously, this idea that there are people on the right who, simply because they're not liberal, is what it seems to boil down to, they're actually also woke. And there's a lot of reasons to resist this terminology because there's a lot of problems with it as a descriptor, as far as accuracy goes and all sorts of other things. There's some big issues here. And so this episode features myself, Dieuwe de Boer, and William McGimpsey talking specifically about this issue of the woke right. Is it real? What is it really all about? And ultimately, as you can already tell, we come down in the negative. This is not a good thing, and this episode is really about highlighting some of the deeper flaws and also, I guess you might say, the strategy that's at play in all of this. If you enjoy this special episode of The Dispatches and you're enjoying the other content that we're producing and you're not already a subscriber, please go to patreon.com/leftfootmedia. And if you become a $5 monthly subscriber, you will get access to exclusive patrons-only content. Or you could also go to the Dispatches on Substack and you can become a monthly subscriber there as well. Thanks again for tuning in. Please enjoy this very special conversation with Dieuwe de Boer and William McGimpsey. William, Dieuwe, it is great to have you here with me. We're not quite here. It's virtual, so it's not really real. But we're in the same virtual location at the same time to discuss what is becoming a hot-button debate of the moment. And it's really being driven by a couple of characters. We'll get into who they are in just a second. But it's this whole debate about, is there such a thing as the woke right? And I was thinking tonight, well, how do we start this? How do we kick this off? What's a good way to start this conversation? And I thought, well, let's explore perhaps where, or do we remember even where we were or what we were doing or where we first saw or heard someone referring to the woke right. Do either of you remember where you were when you first started seeing this nefarious accusation, this slur, if you like, starting to circulate around the place?
Well, thanks, Brendan. Thanks for having me on. I think the first time I remember hearing it was on a YouTube video that was produced by Konstantin Kisin, perhaps. And I can't quite remember whether it was the one where he was interviewing James Lindsay about the term or if he had a separate one before then where he talked about it. But I remember it was a video with Konstantin Kisin. I remember thinking right from the get-go, well, this term's a wee bit disingenuous. They're not. I think they're using it for tactical reasons and not for reasons of accurately describing a phenomenon. And so I sort of, from the first time I heard it, I thought there's a wee bit of a game being played here. They're not exactly being honest.
Interesting. So you spotted the tactical aspect of it first. I think others are coming to that now. For me, I have to be honest, I thought, and funny you should say Konstantin Kisin, because I think that was the first time I actually encountered it as well. And I thought, he's just being clever. Like, this is clever stupidity. They think they're going to sort of present themselves as being really clever scholars, and they've found a new way to use the word woke. And I thought, they're just confusing ideological traits, which is what genuine wokeism is, versus behavioral traits, and they're trying to conflate the two. But it's interesting you saw it as a little strategic game right from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, I think what they're trying to do is leverage the negative associations that have built up around the term woke and apply that to a different group of people who Konstantin Kisin and some of the other people using this term don't like and want to try and discredit. So that's really the tactic that's being used here. Because a lot of the other terms that have been used, politically correct terms that are used to tar people and slander them without engaging substantively in with their ideas, and these would be terms like, racist, sexist, homophobe, xenophobe, anti-Semite, and so on and so forth. This is we're getting into my sort of theory about free speech and censoring people here, but I feel like these terms have been used for a long time to try and read certain ideas, ideological movements out of the mainstream and to censor and suppress them. But with the advent of the internet and social media, people have been able to put some of those arguments back into the mainstream, get people back talking about those ideas again. And what's more, the censorship terms like racist, sexist, homophobe, xenophobe, they've sort of worn off and stopped working to a certain degree. And so woke right is a term meant to be used instead to replace those terms, to have a similar sort of effect to censor people, using the negative associations that have built up about the woke left. And ironically, one of the reasons people have this negative feeling about wokeness or the woke left is because they engage in this sort of censorship type behavior. So now they're trying to apply, they're trying to use it to go after the people who were being censored in the first place.
It's kind of ironic, right? That is and the biggest irony here is this is the Saul Alinsky sort of Marxist playbook anyway, right? You project onto your enemies the very tactics that you are employing yourself. Dieuwe, do you remember? I should bring you in here, Dieuwe, sitting silently there waiting. The rose between two thorns. What do you remember when you first heard it?
Well, thank you. That's very generous of you.
It's a wilting rose, my friend.
Before I talk about the first time that I heard about the woke right, I thought I should mention that for the audience, if they're listening to this and they're wondering, I'm here to find out what is the woke right, who is the woke right. But when you hear the term woke right used, they're talking about us, talking about Brendan, they're talking about William, they're talking about me. That's at the end of the day. Their target of woke right is something that these liberals are using, and they use it to describe any conservative who might have views that they don't particularly like. And there used to be an alliance between us conservatives and liberals against the radical left, and that's where the term woke came from and was used very effectively. We sort of had this anti-woke coalition, and it seems the liberals have figured out that sort of, or at least they've decided that we've won, and that it's time to break up the coalition, and that woke is an excellent weapon that they can now deploy against us. That's ultimately what I would read into it. And the first
time I heard
see
that from the beginning, though?
Well, I saw that from the beginning when I heard the term woke right. I think it was, in this case, was deployed by Joel Berry, who was one of the editors of the Babylon Bee, one of the founders of the Babylon Bee, and he was calling people woke right, people who were asking questions about this mostly had to do with group identity in terms of along ethnic lines, essentially saying, hey, people of certain ethnic groups are showing ethnic solidarity, and there are differences between these ethnic groups, and this then shifted on into, say, Israel, where people weren't showing sufficient support for Israel, in his opinion, and these people then became the woke right. So if they were like conservative people who weren't sufficiently supporting Israel, he was saying they were woke right. And that is where I discovered this term. So from the very beginning, I thought that was a very suspicious. And I knew exactly who it was aimed at from the moment I saw it used.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It is a bit of history repeating, because post World War II, there is a liberal and conservative alliance because of the threat of communism, Soviet communism. It's a very real threat. And in that phase, what happened, though, was really conservatism went far too quiet. And I think conservatism probably was a bit naive. And apart from the guys like Pat Buchanan and others who really did, they were almost like lone voices who tried to hold their ground. Effectively, the liberals were very effective at preaching their dogma into conservatism, and it sort of muddied the waters a lot. And they effectively carried the day in a sense. But now it seems to me something else, this time it's different. And so previously, I don't think they needed to be so vociferous. They'd sort of just won the day. They didn't really need to target conservatives in any way because the conservatives had effectively sort of silenced themselves by not actually holding on to their tradition or certainly transmitting as faithfully as they could have. But now that's changed radically. And I think maybe, William, what you were talking about before with the internet, that possibly is a factor here. The access to ideas is radically different. But that seems that as liberalism is really collapsing this time, it's imploding the old liberal order. They've really come out quite viciously against conservatism, almost like Custer's last stand, in a sense. That's what the sense I get with this woke right tactic.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that the tactic, I mean, this is a long-running thing where I think a lot of people think, and I think there's some truth to it, that William F. Buckley in the United States, a prominent conservative thinker, sort of got started around the 1960s, founded National Review, that he read out or deliberately excluded a lot of certain types of conservatives from the conservative movement. So he initiated purges. And he did so in order to keep his version of the conservative movement, the American conservative movement, in the good books with the liberal elite in the US, potentially to help with some sort of unity in the face of communism, or those sorts of things. But the people who were read out of the movement were Pat Buchanan type conservatives, people who are more nationalist, people who talked about controversial ideas about like innate racial differences, people who are perhaps, and this is something that I think happened more over time, people who was perhaps more on the more vociferous end of criticizing feminism and sexual liberation movements. So that's been going on since the 1960s, and the tools they used to do it were, like I said, this tool of repressive tolerance, using these terms: racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and these things start out as tools that are used in conversation. It terminates the conversation. So thought terminating cliche, I believe, is the term people use. But these things are they're backed up by a soft power infrastructure. If you get called a racist, there are left-wing activists, other people who will then call your employer. If you're a sufficiently big enough target, they will try and get you fired. They will try and destroy your reputation. And so a culture of fear sort of grew up around being accused of these terms. And over time, these rhetorical tools were very effective in shifting the Overton window in the political debate. So over the decades since the 1960s. And I think that is the chief reason that progressivism was able to make such inroads into the culture. And so it's been very effective. However, those sorts of censorship tools, they require a kind of dominance of the opinion-making institutions in order to continue to hold sway. So you sort of have to be able to control most of the media, control academia, control the public service, these opinion-making institutions, in order to be able to control and corral public opinion in this way. And with the advent of the internet and with social media, it sort of gave people a way to get around elite opinion, to talk to each other without the mediating influence of these elites in the middle.
And without fear, probably as well, too, right?
Yeah. And so that has those conversations that people are able to have, and those other sources of information they're able to read, it's allowed a sort of a critical mass of people with the heretical opinions, not literally heretical, but heretical in terms of this new hegemonic
orthodoxy
ideology that's built up. And so it's reached sort of a breakout critical mass now, I think. And the only way I think they can sort of stop these ideas from taking hold and grabbing a hold of the culture and changing the dominant ideas in the culture is through reestablishing censorship. So I think that that's really the last sort of the last gasp they have, is to convince the powers that be to reestablish censorship over social media. And I think ideas like this ban of social media for under 16s, I think, are aimed at reestablishing that sort of control.
Interesting. See, I take a different stance on that. I did a podcast episode on this recently, and I'm comfortable with that as a move. But I in that episode I did also say that being a good conservative, I think you should have a healthy cynicism about particularly the modern liberal state and how they might like to use a tool like that beyond what it was intended for.
Comfortable with the under 16 censorship.
Yeah. I'm as a father of children in that sort of zone, and someone who's kind of aware, well, not kind of, as well aware of the issues that are involved in social media. I view it like this. It's very interesting because some of my conservative friends, they're really staunchly opposed. I view it, I come at it from the angle of, right now we've got large corporations, as in the social media corporations, that have unfettered access to our households. And I see it as an example of the state doing what it should do, which is using its power to give advantage to parents effectively. Is there risk in that the modern liberal state could misuse something like that? Yeah, sure. I'm not naive. I'm realistic, but in principle, I do support such a move. That's interesting. So you're I'm guessing you're a bit more opposed.
Yeah. I mean, I completely acknowledge that there are legitimate harms. These things can be used for things that harm children. So it's sort of a matter of weighing up what's the greater and the lesser harm here.
Yeah. It's funny. Even as we're talking, I was thinking about this actually earlier. Here we are. We're three conservative guys who there would be things we'd absolutely have in common. There'd be points I'm confident we'd disagree on. But ironically, we at this present moment are here having a cordial conversation, not calling each other names. And we look more liberal than the liberals do right now, who are calling everyone who disagrees with them woke right. Right, Dieuwe?
Well, that's exactly it, and I've got a chart in front of me here, which I wanted to go through because it was the one that James Lindsay posted, because he was asked, what's your definition of the woke right? And the reason I didn't discover all of this through James Lindsay is because he blocked me a long time ago, but it seems like anyone who's actually slightly right-wing is blocked by James Lindsay. It's interesting. Yeah. And anyway, this was shared in New Zealand by Annie O'Brien, who's sort of
Hey, before you do that, can I tell you a relevant story?
Go for it.
Jonathan Peugeot, I saw the other day, it was about a week ago, he said he'd been blocked by James Lindsay. James Lindsay unblocked him so he could come and fire a salvo on Peugeot's Twitter, and then he blocked him again straight away. So it's all very odd. But anyway, you're in good company.
But those are the kinds of people we're dealing with here. It's important to keep that in mind. Now, in New Zealand, Annie O'Brien seems to be the one who sort of picked up on this James Lindsay woke right thing, and she is actually a bit more reasonable than James Lindsay. But I just want to say, she's kind of regurgitating his ideas on the supposed definition of woke right. And the distinctives of what they consider woke right are, I'll list them out here. One, admires National Socialism, which describes very, very few people. Number two, blames women, rather vague. Number three, government. For everything. Government redistribution is good if it is called distributism. Now, this is a really odd one. And a lot of people, people who listen to your show...
That's a dig at Dave Green.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I was going to say, people who listen to your show may know what distributism is, but essentially, just to give a quick description, distributism is a name for Catholic social theory. This was basically the sort of a political system that Roman Catholics in Europe came up with in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Dutch, I say Protestants in Europe had similar social political theories as well. In the Netherlands, you had in particular something called sphere sovereignty. And in the early 1900s, they kind of merged together to form the Christian Democrats. So the Christian Democrats you have today are kind of in Europe, are kind of a shadow of what's left of that movement of distributists and sphere sovereigntists and so on. So
and it's also it's got a big economic component, and it's not like we're talking guys like G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc are big thinkers in this space, and they're absolutely not socialists or closet communists. And because people see the word distributism, they think, it is another form of distributing goods. No, not at all. And in fact, there's I think it's in Spain. There's a factory that's still running. Where basically, I'll give you an example of how it works. They're a factory that produces things in an open market, but all of the workers own shares in the actual company that they work in. All of them, massive factory, and they all own shares. So they own what the industry they work in a sense.
Yes, and as we have sort of revealed here, is that these are essentially personal slights that some of these liberals seem to have against particular right-wing personalities, and you see that the so-called woke right distinctives, they seem to be targeted at very specific people in ways like this reference to distributism being primarily targeted at Dave Green. I've got two more here. They say that they believe that the woke right believes that everyone should think the same, in particular that all legal immigration is bad. So again, there's a few people I could think of who that's probably targeted at. And then the final woke right distinctive is that we want a state religion, that's Christianity. So again, that's James Lindsay's anti-Christian bias coming in. Anyone who's a traditional Christian in any sense, who believes that Christianity should, like morality should be an important part of what the government does. If you go to any European country, Christianity is still the state religion. They're like officially in England, Christianity is the state religion. In the Netherlands, Christianity is the state religion, and so on. So this is really very much these atheist American liberals who are using this term woke right to target mostly Christians, and then they're throwing a little bit of Nazi allegations in there.
Yeah, and I think that's where the currency is, right, William? If you like, you were talking about this before. If I can throw that around at you, you're a Nazi, you're a communist, a closet communist, you hate women or whatever, probably they're relying on previously, there'd been quite a bit of self-policing. And I think that's not an unhealthy instinct. No one wants to be lacking in virtue or to be some sort of awful predatory or, bigoted character. So, the initial instinct is probably not a bad one on the part of conservatives, but that really doesn't have the same cachet anymore, does it? That people are a bit more aware of the trick now.
They've overused it, and it's sort of worn off. But I think I had the opportunity actually to debate James Lindsay when he came to New Zealand. He was brought here by the New Zealand Free Speech Union. So, and I trotted down to Parliament, and I was part of a panel discussion where we debated exactly this subject, whether woke right is a legitimate term or not. And, I asked him what he meant by it, and he just means what used to be called the alt-right, or what we now call like the dissident right, or what some people call the online right. He means people online who have, right-wing ideas that might be a little bit outside the what counts for mainstream conservatism. The problem, the reason they have to behave in this way is because the people they're trying to criticize, they actually have some good ideas that are, in my opinion, true. And every time these ideas have sort of a fair fight, so to speak, on the battlefield of ideas with liberal ideas, they tend to win. So they have to, and they're caught between this sort of rock and a hard place where they want to sell themselves as the defenders of free and open debate and all that sort of thing, but they keep losing the argument. So they have to try and censor these people out of the marketplace of ideas while pretending they're not censoring them out of the marketplace of ideas. So it's a very difficult position for them to be in, and that's why they behave this way, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, isn't it? There's at the heart of it all, I mean, you're right about the rock and a hard place, because effectively liberalism is the collapsing, dying order. It is the star that we're in the middle of this thing falling around our ears. It is the liberal order. And it's also, its core premises have now been absolutely shown with the movement of time and history have been shown to be incorrect, and are really sort of, that's becoming very apparent now. And then on top of that, they were also powerless to actually stop, ironically, genuine, woke ideology came out of their movement. And so it's like there's all these boxes that are really, like, they're in a very precarious position. Like I said earlier, it does feel like Custer's last stand in a sense. They're desperately trying to cling on. And when, like, I tell you why I say that is, when I see James Lindsay recently talking about how awesome the 1990s were, and you sort of get that sense that in his mind that's possibly the ideal sort of zenith. And in a sense, that was probably the final apex of liberalism before it all unraveled. That sort of seems to be this nostalgic longing to cling on desperately to whatever they can.
Yeah, you see this reference to the 1990s as peak peak liberalism, and I often do that as well. Well, I would say, for instance, Elon Musk as a 1990s liberal. But the thing that's often missed is the changes that have happened since because of liberalism. And so this idea that they could bring back the 90s is largely impossible because of demographic change. And, like I mentioned Annie O'Brien earlier, and I'd referenced some of her work on this. I saw a tweet from her the other day that made me think of why this is impossible. She said she'd gone to Middlemore Hospital and, witnessed the ethnic diversity and cultural enrichment resulting in huge amounts of racism and racial abuse being thrown at like all these different racial groups who are intermingling at Middlemore Hospital, and how that made her very uncomfortable and how this was bad. And I thought, obviously, if you go back 30 years, New Zealand was like 90% European. It was a homogenous country. Christianity was, we'd have to go back a little bit further, but it was a majority Christian country. And so you had a homogenous country that essentially experienced this peak liberalism. And then after that, the massive amounts of diversity started completely shredding any ability to have a liberal country. So, and this is something they refuse to admit because they think, well, it's just, you can replace people. People are just replaceable biomass. And as long as they believe the same thing, right? They come here because they love freedom and they want to experience and they share our values because they work hard. And those are our values, right? You love freedom, you work hard, you have our values. And it doesn't work in practice. But they refuse to admit this.
No, the theory too is that like you're saying, everyone is effectively, they've got it does differ between the Enlightenment liberal thinkers, but effectively the dominant idea probably now is that you're just a blank slate. And if we take away the dictator and the oppressions, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you'll just want to be a liberal. That's the theory, right? And it's just not true at all.
Yeah, and the refusal to admit this and to say, hey, there are, like, people have these instinctive group behaviors. People behave in accordance with their blood and their genetics and their ethnicity. They're not just people you can pick up and move somewhere else, and then they behave completely differently. But they consider that a step too far. And this I think is a universal belief among the people who criticize others for being woke right, is they have this blank slate theory that you're describing that underpins anyone who uses the term woke right. As soon as you see them use the term woke right, I think you're dealing with someone who believes in the blank slate theory.
There's a long-standing debate between conservatives, going right back to Edmund Burke. It's part of what he put in his book, The Reflections of the Revolution on France, and liberals over how important tradition and cultural cohesion, having a shared set of moral and cultural norms and a shared sort of group of people, how important that is to sustaining the liberal freedoms. And the conservative argument has always been you need to have a group of people who have a sort of commonality. They have to have something in common. They have to be a people in a certain sense in order for those liberal freedoms to be sustained. Because if they stop having things in common, if they start to see themselves as differing groups of people, then in order to preserve the social cohesion that was preserved organically by having things in common, you'll have to substitute some sort of authoritarian measures in order to hold these different and competing groups together. And this is exactly what we're seeing now in all these liberal democracies that have imported large amounts of diversity and have fostered these identity-based movements, the gay rights movement and women's rights movements and all this other stuff as well, is that they're now trying to limit freedom of speech. That they started limiting freedom of association a long time ago as part of the Civil Rights Act in America, started limiting that. And they're increasing surveillance and spying on these various people. They're sending police around to people's homes to warn them about the memes they're posting on the internet and all this sort of thing. So we're seeing the proof of what the conservatives have argued for a long time, in that in the absence of a sort of natural social cohesion that comes out of having a shared culture, the governments are having to impose authoritarian controls. They're having to take people's freedoms away in order to stop people from using those freedoms and to agitate against one another. And that's really the great fear. And this is one of the fears that I have when I hear people railing against identity politics, right? Now, I completely agree that identity politics does harm your social cohesion. But if you're going to crack down on identity politics, the only way you can really crack down on it is by limiting people's freedom of speech to talk about identity politics, limiting their freedom of association, so they can't organise according to their identity groups to advance their interests, and so on and so forth. So they've built themselves into this position where they've imported these different identity groups or created them through academics and doing their thing in the universities. Then we have a pluralistic democracy. So of course people are going to get together according to having common interests to advance those interests within the pluralistic democratic system. What would you expect them to do? That's exactly what you want people to do within the rules.
That's natural law.
I've worked for several lobby groups, Federated Farmers and things like this, and they all work on that principle, and that's how we want people to work within our democracies. You get together peacefully, organised to advance your interests. So it's natural that ethnic groups, different religious groups, and different interest groups representing different women's rights and gay rights, it's natural that they would behave that way as well. The way to have stopped this happening in the first place would be not to import all the different identities into your country and not to foster this divisive identity politics type culture in the universities. You can't crack down on it now without taking people's freedoms away. So that's the real problem.
Yeah, and I think too, this is the irony I see in all of this when I see particularly Lindsay throwing around woke right. And I think to myself, hold on a minute, you're talking here about natural realities. People do coalesce around tradition or identity or a sense of self that is what I can't remember who the Polish philosopher was, but he referred to the thick self. Liberalism hates the thick self, whether it's Christianity or perhaps someone who has a strong national identity. They have a self that is thicker than just the liberal sort of thin membrane, if you like. That's sort of the predominant idea. But what liberalism doesn't acknowledge is that they are the very thing they claim others are and accuse others of. That they engage in their own brand of identity politics, but they just don't recognize it as being identitarian in nature.
That's exactly right. Liberalism is a political philosophy, and liberals get together in political parties and they get together in interest groups to advocate for liberalism, and they brand their opponents with terms like illiberal and using exclusive and divisive language in the same way that they think that the Maori Party does, for example. Their solution to this problem is just, if only everyone thought like us, then things wouldn't be so divisive. But it's not. You're not really being tolerant and inclusive like you claim you are. What tolerant and inclusive means to you is making everyone think the same as you, or excluding them from the mainstream and having the thought police come and get them if they think something different.
I think we should address the elephant in the room as well on the list of issues that I mentioned earlier. I hinted at this at the beginning. There seems to be a very heavy focus on people who use the term woke right on making sure that everybody has the correct view on Israel. And there seems to
I was
be
actually just going to ask
anti-Zionism essentially seems to be what the focus on Zionism. And I would probably say at least 50% of the time I see this woke right term used, it is to go after someone who either has different views on World War II, the post-war narrative, the post-war consensus that we've talked about, or specifically doesn't like the actions of the Israeli government. So if someone's critical of Benjamin Netanyahu, someone is critical of the Israeli military action in Gaza, and they're conservative, well, then they get called woke right. And it seems to be particularly, and this seems to come from both these classical liberals, so-called, and the neoconservatives, who are all in 100% on Zionism. I know the two of you have been more critical of Israel than I have, and that seems to be, so they don't use this on me, but it seems to be at least 50% of the time I see them use this on other people, is, oh, you're not towing the line properly on having the right views on Israel, the right pro-Israel views, the right pro-Zionist views.
What do you think? What is that? Is that the sort of evangelical Christian influence in American politics? You know, that whole end times eschatology where they thought Israel was such a key player they had to defend and secure it for their own spiritual future. And that's still hung around? Because like I'm a lot of these guys who are doing this, I mean, okay, maybe some of the examples like the Babylon Bee guys are a bit different, but most of them don't seem to be Christians who are. I
was going to say that is, other than Joel Berry, I don't know someone who, most of the people who are very much pro-Zionist and using woke right to castigate conservatives who are not sufficiently pro-Zionist. These people tend to be atheists, or they tend to be Jewish. It's less so other Christians doing this at the moment.
I would just say I would agree with you that Brendan. I would agree that the sort of boomer evangelical Christians in the US, that's a big reason for the support for Israel in the US, and that is a big reason why we have these negative attitudes towards people who are critical of Israel. But another factor I'd just like to bring up is I studied, one of the things I studied at university anyway is international relations. And the preeminent scholar in that field is a guy called John Mearsheimer. He belongs to the realist school of international relations. But he wrote a book on the Israel lobby and the power of the Israel lobby in Washington, saying, that basically they have too much power and they're influencing US foreign policy in a way that it is making the US do things that are not really in the US's interests, but they are more in Israel's interests. Now, when you say things like this, people tend to say things like, well, that's an anti-Semitic conspiracy people. You're repeating these age-old, these age-old tropes and things like that. But this is the most respected scholar, or one of the most respected scholars in the field of international relations. When he published this work, he was, what happened to him is exactly what you'd expect would happen. He was sort of excluded. And from his speaking circuit, he sort of had to go underground a little bit and do these other events out of the mainstream a little bit. And this is the most preeminent scholar. So these terms like anti-Semitism and things like that, they have a lot of power. They're deployed against people who criticize Israeli influence. And I think it's just a fact that Israel uses its diaspora very effectively within other countries in order to try and move the political conversation in those countries in directions that are more helpful to Israel and Israel's interests. They've lived as a diaspora people for a very long time, and they've become very effective at they have a very effective system for influencing the politics of other nations in ways that are favorable to them. And one of the ways they are able to do this is by going after people who point out that they're doing this and harming them and calling them anti-Semites and making them lose their jobs and things like this. So I think this is another important piece of the puzzle. This woke tactics, in a way, were kind of the Jewish lobby was probably at the forefront of implementing this style of politics in the Western world in the first place.
It's kind of interesting because I in a sense, I'm torn. I wrote an op-ed piece some weeks ago about the Douglas Murray appearance on Joe Rogan, and I like Murray, actually, generally speaking, as a commentator, and I think he has some valuable things to say. There's big points, obviously, I disagree with him on, but as I was saying in that op-ed, I wanted to believe, like I've got some really good friends who are good people on our side of the ledger who are all in for Israel. I'm not. I'm a bit more hesitant, and I sort of tend to see the problems on both sides. And yeah, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it sort of feels like one of those areas where I'm like, it's better to shut your mouth and say nothing than open up the minefield now, which it doesn't feel healthy at all. But ironically, as you're talking about the Jewish diaspora and the way they've used that very effectively, from a conservative perspective, we would say that's what you should actually expect to see in the world, is people actually lobbying for their own people's interests. And that's how international relations, in a sense, have been done. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of other things tied up in that aren't healthy, but the point is that's the liberal kind of view doesn't really get that, ironically. But man, it is I don't know how you guys feel about it. For me, it just feels like such a fraught area to even step into now. It's
an area that I tend to avoid, but it seems like I can't avoid it at the moment. But while you were saying this, I was just thinking, rather openly, the Israeli embassy here in New Zealand pays for New Zealand commentators to go to Israel and say good things about Israel. And they take the money and they do these things. That's up to them, I guess. And that's considered completely normal. And you're not allowed to criticize that either. It makes people ask questions, but then, of course, you just get called names if you try to say, hey, is this actually something that should be encouraged, and is something that, as you say, this is normal for country, this is normal for people to do, to take care of their own ethnic interests. But at the same time, you get called all kinds of names if you criticize this, and is that really something that, as a country, we should be allowing to happen and should be encouraging? And that's another whole negative part of the age of diversity.
I just make an important point. It's not really necessary for them, for the Jewish diaspora, to be doing anything wrong or anything against the rules in order for their behaviour to have a negative effect on the countries that they're in. Merely the fact that they're very effective at doing it is enough to create a sort of systemic issue in the political conversations in the countries that they're involved in. So I don't want to take a position. I mean, I'm not sure that everything they're doing is above board, but even if it was, it's the fact that there's a systemic issue there within the political conversations of the Western countries that they're in. That's really an issue that I think has to be addressed, because if countries are being sort of pushed or manipulated into taking actions in the realm of foreign policy or elsewhere that are not in the interests of their own citizens, then it's time to speak up and do something to address that systemic issue. But that's a separate issue from whether, as a group or as individuals, the Jewish lobbies are doing anything outside of the rules.
And I should interject quickly as well, because you don't get called woke right if you, say, criticize the activities of the Chinese diaspora, the way the Communist Party infiltrates New Zealand. You don't get called woke right. If you criticize the way the Indian government, the Hindutva movement, manipulates New Zealand politics to benefit Indians, you don't get called woke right. If you criticize the Sikh nationalist, the Sikh separatist movement in New Zealand, you're not going to be called woke. You criticize, the Arab, the Palestinian pro-Gaza movements, they're not calling you woke right either. But when we're talking about the woke right, it seems to be, as I say, the term, whenever I read about these people who use the term and when they're describing it, this always seems to come back to Israel, Israeli government policy and Zionism and so on.
So in a sense then, is there a bit of a perfect storm here? I'll get to the other factor in a moment, but it does seem that the October 7 attacks almost certainly have thrown a whole, a hand grenade, no pun intended, but into the midst of this whole conversation as well now. It's sort of the stakes feel far too high in a sense.
Well, what I would say on that is that so I think a lot depends on Israel was worried about its support, public support in the US. Like Israel relies a lot on US military assistance and US diplomatic support and so forth. And they've had a lot of, they've been viewed favorably by boomers, evangelical Christians in the US, but young people are increasingly viewing Israel less favorably. And one of the chief reasons for this is to do with social media. So young people going on social media, TikTok, apparently TikTok is being used very effectively by Palestinian activists. A lot of young people are turning against Israel. And so the Israeli government is looking at these facts, and it realizes how important its support in the US is to. It's existentially important, right? And so they're thinking about if we, what are we going to do in light of the fact that we risk losing our US support shortly? We have US support now. We have problems with the terrorism in Gaza. Basically, I mean, what people are saying, what people like John Minto are saying is this is an apartheid state. They're keeping these, the Palestinians in sort of these, the equivalent of Bantustans. They're treating them very, very poorly. If they lose US support and they still have that situation, that could mean something very bad for the Israeli state. If we look over at what happened to South Africa, what happened to the Afrikaners in South Africa. I mean, there was a lot of problems under apartheid in South Africa for the black population. I'm not going to argue that. But the post-apartheid solution, there's problems with that as well. So the basic infrastructure and governance is run very poorly. The Afrikaner population is being there's a lot of laws passed to treat white South Africans with they have different and lesser rights than the black population. There's ongoing farm killings. We're all watching the news there. So Israel doesn't want to have to face that sort of situation in its own country, and that's a very real risk if they lose US support, because a lot of the rest of the world already views them very negatively, and they may
and I should say they were big supporters of South Africa. They were big supporters of Rhodesia as well. Israel gave a lot of military assistance to those countries because it realized it was in the same boat as them.
Yeah. So I think they're trying to. And this is a very cynical view, but it's a view shared by other realist international relations thinkers, that they're trying to solve the problem of these the Gazan population, the Palestinian population, and now militarily, while they still have US support.
It's strange how this conversation now, and part of it could be the age we're living in, and again, the liberal hegemony has collapsed. So it's easy to sort of allow people a certain amount of freedom to speak their mind and to raise issues about what's going on in Israel when you're in control and you've got dominance. But once that goes, things tend to get a bit more desperate. But it feels the stakes are a lot higher now. Because I can remember as a young guy, I still remember where I was actually, exactly where I was, when someone got on a microphone and announced that Operation Desert Storm had started. And I was here in New Zealand. And I actually had a couple of cousins who served in the US Navy over there. Very brief war, obviously. But I remember at the time being very naive about that whole situation, and then hearing from some Palestinian Christians afterwards about when Saddam was firing Scud missiles and they weren't sure whether they were chemically tipped or not into Israel. They were distributing gas masks to Jewish families, but they weren't giving them to Palestinian and Christian Palestinian families. So like this conversation has been going on that long and longer, but now it certainly feels like, it's so possibly there is something to that theory that the stakes are really emanating from Israel itself, in the sense they understand the gravity of what the situation is now that they're in.
And the main point I would add here is to say that this doesn't really help their cause. This is where I find it difficult to figure out what exactly the plan is here, if there even is a plan on these people who are using the term woke right, because it makes me suspicious. Someone who's generally very positive about Israel suddenly makes me very suspicious to see all of these people who are influencers supporting Israeli policy, then starting to call all these people on the right woke. And I'm hey, this is what is the end game here? Because it doesn't seem like they have this is not something you win in terms of public support, because people see what you're doing and they go, that's odd. I'm starting to notice a pattern here, and all it does is deteriorate your situation.
Well, also, you've got people like Yoram Hazani, who's a phenomenal conservative commentator and also a biblical scholar, actually, in a Christian university, but is a practicing Orthodox Jew. And he came out, had an excellent, very lengthy tweet just the other day, actually, really criticising Lindsay and co. and just saying we actually had a very effective blockade against wokeism, and we really were pushing ahead very effectively. And these guys have just suddenly turned the cannons on their own men effectively. Now we've got friendly fire going on, and that actually allows the other side back into the fight. And he was really, really critical of the threat that it poses just in general at the moment when effectively there was starting to be a bit more of a push into woke territory, if you want to call it or frame it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from a tactical, just from a political tactics point of view, if you are trying to position yourself as a liberal centrist, what you want to do is you want to, when the Conservatives are in power, then you ally yourself with the woke left against the Conservatives, and when it's the other way around, then you ally yourselves with the Conservatives against them. And if you rinse and repeat, you do it enough times, if you can sort of weaken the people, if you can put yourself in the middle and weaken the people on both sides, and over time, you carry the strong political ground in the middle and you weaken your enemy. So I think that there doesn't have to be necessarily anything about Israel to in order for them to adopt a strategy like that. The center ground is the high ground in democratic politics, and so they want to put themselves in the middle and adopt a strategy like that. But I think there is something to the idea that the censorious behavior was effective for a long time, but it was effective in an environment where their ideological friends were able to control most of the opinion-shaping institutions like the media and academia and the public sector. And the sort of information environment has changed now with social media, such that the behavior can be critiqued and unpacked and pointed out in real time, and that when you're doing that, you reveal to people the tricks that are at play, the dirty tactics that are at play, and it kind of backfires on you. So it's what they're doing is a strategy that has been successful for a long time, and it's just I'm not sure whether it's going to. I probably think it's not going to be successful in the current informational environment. But the exception there is if they can reinstitute censorship, I think it will work again in the same way it worked in the past. And they are in some areas they are making ground in terms of re-establishing control over social media and censoring it again. So I think that's really what we have to be what we have to look out for and prevent.
I absolutely could see how that could well be the case. Where I would say I think a little bit differently about this is I think there are some bigger existential and anthropological questions at play now. Like liberalism's anthropology effectively has been shown to be false now, and more and more people are looking at the world and going, "Hey, what you're offering and have been offering, particularly the last few decades, it's just not working." Then they look across and they see something like the extremes of socialism, and they're not really enamored by that either. They have enough of a sense that that's not right. And so it seems to me that there is a bit of a return to more of the, well, if I could go back to the terminology of the thick self, like you are seeing, for example, Christianity starting to return to the public square. And I think, thankfully, not before time, in a more robust and intelligent kind of way. It's actually speaking to the cultural issues. Obviously not all cases, but more so now, and bringing that intellectual tradition and heft to the table again, and people are sort of interested in that. And I feel that's a difference this time. Like liberalism doesn't have that same hegemonic control that it previously did.
No, I mean, this is a point I agree with as well. I mean, I think there's the liberal ideology insists on the individual as the chooser of his own fate, whereas I think in reality, people are born into particular circumstances. They're gifted by fate, particular genes, particular cultures. They're born into a particular location. Everyone's possibilities for their lives are limited by the circumstances into which they're born, and you really only have a limited range of possibilities that you're able to actualize through your choices. And Liberalism doesn't accept that view of more sort of a limited range of choices or
Because that's
possibilities
the
for
ultimate
human life.
heresy under liberalism.
Yeah. No prior tradition can lay claim. No prior community. Yeah, even the family.
It's a false idea. So I basically agree with this.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually, speaking of that, I heard something that was really quite eye-opening in a sense, because it's not something you normally hear, excuse me, in the West. I was in Australia earlier this year speaking at a big conference of the Syro-Malabar youth movement, and Syro-Malabar are Eastern Rite Catholics, and their Archbishop, who is obviously the man in charge, he spoke to all of these young people present. I happened to be there. It was actually quite interesting that also with him was the youngest new cardinal in the church. He's Ukrainian cardinal, and also Eastern Rite Catholic. And but the head of the Syro-Malabar, this Indian archbishop, gets up and he says, "You have been blessed by God to have been born into the Syro-Malabar tradition, and you have an obligation to it." And I was like, wow, you just don't hear that kind of conversation anymore in the West. And there was something profoundly good and true about that, in a sense, like, it's not something, it's because the reality is they didn't choose it. They were born into a family with a prior tradition. And just like has been happening for time immemorial and is the very natural reality of things, there's a lot in life we don't actually choose, and the liberal anthropology is flawed in that way. And there's a lot we also don't reason our way to either.
Yeah, well, I think it used to be the idea of divine providence, right? So, I mean, it's much easier to tolerate the idea of people being fundamentally unequal and having unequal, chances or outcomes in life if there's an all-powerful God who's all good and has arranged things just so to make everyone have a correct place in his plan, and to be able to live the good and appropriate life that God has planned for them. If you don't have that part of it, then the idea that people are born unequally with unequal chances in life is much harder, I think, to tolerate psychologically. And I think that's at least part of the reason for the psychological need to believe in equality.
Yeah, well, I think also that human dignity factor that Christianity gives as well, and that often, well, when it's functioning properly, you get a dignity in your work as well. Like, the idea is any authentic Christian tradition is going to tell you that everyone who's contributing in some meaningful way, or who's contributing in any way to the life of the community, now however small, there's still dignity in that work. Whereas the liberal economic model is very much not that. You've got to be either the guy who's wealthy, the guy who's famous, the guy who's whatever. It's all about climbing the ladder. And ironically, they've actually undermined. You can see liberalism doing all the things, projecting onto other movements that's actually done to society.
And it kind of tells people. Sorry, Dieuwe, I was just to this point. It kind of tells people that if they make it to the top, so to speak, then they've done so because they're meritorious.
That's
and
right.
Conversely, if they're on the bottom, it's their fault as well, and that's really hard to live with. So I think that's another downside of believing in the sort of liberal story. There's no sense of hard luck. There's no sense of noblesse oblige for the people who make it either.
And it's interesting. I wanted to add to this is that the original alliance we had against wokeness, or the criticism of wokeness, which was their diversity, equity, inclusion, and what we call wokeness basically was the radical leftism, Marxist theory, progressivism. At the very core of it, the very heart of wokeness is this idea that people should be made equal, because it's fundamentally unfair for people to have unequal lives. It's unfair for people to not be able to achieve the same outcomes, and in their rejection of God, in their rejection of providence, they invented this system to create equality. And yet we see that the liberals, who until 5 minutes ago were on our side, well, actually that same rejection of providence is built into into the system of liberalism. Only the difference being, as William has laid out, that of course being more, being better than is good, being worse than is bad, and that it's all your fault, as you say, in liberalism. But at the same time, there is that tendency to trying to equalize because it's unfair that people are different. That's built into liberalism that leads to wokeness. The only way to escape that cycle is to accept divine providence, to accept that God has made people unequal in external senses.
Yeah, and that people freak out when they hear that because they go, "Oh, this is bigoted," and it's like, no. You go and read your Edmund Burke. Like, one of the funny thing is, like, of the major things in Edmund Burke's life, and he's quite well known for establishing the modern political party and the French Revolution. He was very prophetic in that regard. But in actual fact, as far as he was concerned, his most important work, which ultimately he didn't succeed in, was his attempts to rein in the abuses of the British economic companies that were functioning in East Indies and places like that, and who were mistreating the locals and treating them as chattels and property and not persons. And he tried to have the Governor General over there impeached, and it didn't succeed. But so this is the sort of this is the mold of conservatism, certainly for me, that I subscribe to, and it's very much grounded in the idea that yes, there is difference, and some people we're not all sitting on the same playing field, but that doesn't mean that the powerful. In fact, the obligation really is on the powerful from certainly in the Christian vision of reality, is to put their power at the service of goodness and truth, and the preferential option for the poor and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I was going to say, God is very clear that to whom much has been given, much shall be required.
Exactly.
And that's fundamentally the Christian solution. And that gets wiped out with wokeness and with liberalism.
Well, can I say too that what you were talking about before, Dieuwe, with the liberalism sort of baked into it is the idea of this equality. That is very much part of it, this idea that we're equal in all things. It's one of the core tenets. We're all born equal. But obviously that's not correct. And on top of that, this is an argument that Yoram Bazani makes, actually, that he says this is why liberalism is ultimately powerless against Marxism, because the Marxists just show up and they say, hey, I can see inequality. And the liberals sort of sheepishly get embarrassed and go, oh, yeah, they're not the same. And they say, we demand more rights. And they don't really have anything to push back with it against. And so they just give in. And then they turn up again and say, hey, we can see more inequality. And he says it's this constant circular dance that goes on. And liberalism is really powerless to actually do anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, liberalism has the conservative argument, or part of the conservative argument anyway, is that you're not automatically allergic at looking at things in terms of collectives. And so the health of the collective is a legitimate thing for you to think about. Whereas if you're thinking about things only in terms of the individual, as the liberal individualists do, you don't care for collectives. You can't consider things that are healthy for the collective, like some sort of an economic system that results in socioeconomic inequality. So if the individual is all important, then you come up with these systems like trying to equalize socioeconomic outcomes against all classes, all races, or sexual proclivities, or genders, which is really a big part of what wokeness was about. That if there's no divine justice, we have to have justice here on earth. And so we're going to do it by ensuring equal socioeconomic outcomes against all these different, between all these different classes of people.
One thing I've noticed in the last week or so, and I feel like it's not something I'm looking for, listeners or viewers, it sounds like I'm constantly spying on James Lindsay and co.'s tweets. I'm not. It's just constantly in my feed, because it feels to me a bit like maybe Lindsay certainly is terminally online. And he's always
I unfollowed him and he's still there. You can't get rid of him.
He just keeps appearing, hey. But I see lately a couple of things, and I want to ask you about one of them in just a second. But he was in a recent screed. He was a very lengthy screed, in fact. He was talking about how, look, see, they're saying some of the same things, these conservatives, as what the Marxists were saying. And I'm like, yeah, but do you not realize that that's an intelligent person is able to recognize that Marx, his solutions were terrible and evil and wrong, but that doesn't mean he was wrong about what he was seeing. So, and in fact, if everyone all over the spectrum is seeing something similar that they see as a problem, And obviously they're trying to apply or propose different solutions. A conservative and a Marxist are not proposing the same solution at all. And the liberals are the only ones not seeing the problem. Surely that should give you a bit of an indication that maybe, as the old meme goes, are we the baddies, Hans? Like maybe we've actually not understood reality like we think we have if so many disparate groups are seeing similar problems.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. James is his behavior has turned increasingly bizarre. So he gave this big speech, and this is what he does. He goes around and gives these big speech defining what wokeness is. And his big knock on the woke right isn't that they believe the same things really so much as the woke left. It's that they engage in similar behaviors. Yet he's doing the behaviors, right? So I mean, he's engaging in these censorious behaviors. He's engaging in this. What do they call it? Like, what does Jordan Peterson call it? The dark tetrad.
Dark triad.
Yeah.
The dark triad traits.
Whatever that is. He's doing that, So,
and it's identitarian.
You forgot about the Hegelian dialectic as well, whatever that,
Yeah.
The Hegelian dialect, that's a reasonable idea. I mean, it's thesis.
No, but it seems everything seems to come back. Everything seems to come back to the Hegelian dialectic
Look, as I've said to groups when I give presentations on this, Hegel's dialectical is perfectly fine if you're in a committee meeting and you're discussing what colour the flyers should be for your next promotional event. But when you apply that to history, like Marx did, now you've got a problem, right? And try and create this deterministic Hegelian version of history. But yeah, and this is an interesting thing. I think a mature person is able to say, yeah, okay, Marx was seeing genuine injustices in his day. His solution's wrong, though. And it feels like Lindsay can't even countenance that. The moment you even, I don't know, like I read his book by Helen Pluckrose, and I still would recommend it to people, but I always have had a caveat with it and said, look, you just got to be aware that there are some things in this that I don't think accord with reality. And it just feels to me like he's just, ironically, he's got into this very narrow identitarian lens of his own. Anything that falls outside of it has got to be evil.
Well, you've just mentioned Yoram Hazany as well, and he's James Lindsay's latest target. James Lindsay saying that national conservatism is the ultimate target of the final boss of the woke right is national conservatism, which is Yoram Hazany. Yeah, it's completely unhinged. He's spiraling rapidly out of control.
Well, I saw too, they were just a couple of hours ago, they were targeting Marco Rubio, who put out a video when he went to the Vatican, I think for the inauguration, maybe the new Pope or something like that. And Rubio, obviously Catholic, and he's like, this is produced by the State Department. Look, the integralists are trying to take over our nation. It was like, guys, you really are starting to sound like the conspiracy theorists that you claim you're not. Like, this is kind of like Candace Owens on speed from my perspective. It's just bizarre. They really are worried, though, I think.
Which is ironic that you mentioned Candace Owens, because it seems like she was one of the first people they came up with the idea of woke right was to target Candace Owens, where we had it would have been perfectly fine just to call her a conspiracy theorist. But that wasn't enough. They had to come up with these new terms that they could try and create a big conspiracy web out of to like piece together a large group of people. And somebody had the list, I don't have it in front of me, but said, hey, if you've got a term that encompasses like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and Yoram Hazany and J.D. Vance and everybody else, that's obviously an insane term definition to have, because those people have basically nothing in common.
Well, was it Benjamin Boyce, I think, who posted the anime meme with the guy looking at the butterfly? And he posted a version of that. And the butterfly was complex ideas that I don't necessarily agree with. And then it's like Lindsay and co looking at it and saying, are you woke, right? And it's like they just don't know how to grapple with ideas that don't fit this very narrow binary. It feels to me like increasingly anyone who's not liberal, you're woke right, or woke left, I suppose.
And that may be the good kind of final word on that for me. They're basically saying anyone who's illiberal is woke. Wokeness is now being redefined to mean someone who's illiberal.
Is it going to die though? I feel a little bit like it's already, even Lindsay, like in the last couple of days, feels like he's backtracking a little bit now.
We may have been making this video near the tail end of the woke right saga.
Late to the
we'll
party.
Just let you up. Yeah, that may very well be possible. But hey, who knows? Maybe we've got some people listening who have been very confused by this, and hopefully we've cleared some things up and not made it even more confusing.
What do you reckon, William?
Yeah, I mean, I probably agree that the term, even if the term sticks, it's not going to have the desired effect unless formal censorship is able to be instituted against these against people with these views, and that's the big fear that I have, is that will occur. And this is why I'm suspicious of the under 16 censorship bill. I mean, I think one of the fears with that is that it could require some sort of digital ID or something like that. You have to log into the internet, and that could have problems for anonymity on social media. And anonymity, the ability to have an anonymous social media account, has done a huge amount to sort of unravel some of these myths about liberal ideology and the things I've been talking about here. It's done a lot to counter wokeness, the woke left, because the enforcement mechanism is unable to be applied to anonymous people. If people say things under their own name, and people are able to find out who they are, they're able to threaten them, they're able to defame them, they're able to go after them and get them fired from their work, that sort of thing. If you have large numbers of anonymous accounts, they're able to say the things they don't want you to say, and without having that personal harm brought against them. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that's really my big fear, is if some sort of formal censorship of the internet or of social media is able to be brought back in, then I think that James Lindsay might end up not looking so silly. I think he looks silly now because people are able to critique him in real time and show why he's silly. But that really is what it comes down to, I think, is whether formal censorship can be reinstituted.
Yeah, and I don't think that's an unreasonable fear. I mean, the current modern liberal state or even progressive state, they will absolutely take advantage of even genuine problems where solutions could be applied and sort of use them as wedges to insert their own problematic things in that are all about control. I guess in the meantime, what do you think? What is the obviously there's been some really great work, I think, being done by guys like Carl Benjamin, who I think have done a lion's share of the really pushing back, and others. What can conservatism do in a sense to give a united front to actually just sort of, I guess, pour water on the fire, drill holes in the boat of this, accusation, this slur of woke right?
Well, I think that the good thing to do is to be well behaved, to not engage in the bad behaviors, and to make good empirically based arguments against some of the things that James Lindsay believes, some of the things that the woke left type people believes. If you try and be the good guy and you succeed in being the good guy, it's much harder, I think, for people to paint you as the bad guy and say that you must be censored off the internet. So, I mean, off the top of my head, that's probably the best I can do there.
No, that's wise. Very wise. Time tested, true. Very conservative way of approaching issues, isn't it? Be a man of virtue or a woman of virtue. It's pretty hard to accuse you otherwise, right? What do you think, Dieuwe?
I don't think I can beat that. That's hard advice to top. I was only going to say, you mentioned Carl Benjamin in the UK. I was thinking of Oren McIntyre from the United States, and they do a really good job of fronting the new right, what was called the dissident right, but I prefer to call it the ascendant right at the moment. Really a genuine conservative, genuine right-wing beliefs that are coming back to the forefront, that have been buried for nearly 100 years. And you have these guys who are following William's advice. Right? They're sensible, normal men with healthy families who engage incredibly well with people online in good faith, and they do so offline as well in the real world. and keep an eye on those men, keep an eye on them on doing that work, and be part of it if you can. Follow their example, and I think that we will make very, very good progress.
One last thing to wrap it up, gentlemen, and I'll start, so you've got a little bit of time to think about this, is can you think of perhaps any either authors' books or perhaps sources even online that you would advise people to go to who perhaps are thinking, oh, yeah, I've never really thought about this before. Maybe liberalism isn't all it's cracked up to be. My recommendations would be start with something like Patrick J. Deneen's book, Why Liberalism Failed. That's absolutely well worth starting with. And I think also even something like Yoram Hazani's Conservatism Rediscovered is quite a worthwhile place to begin with. I think too, we mentioned him earlier, Dave Green. Dave Green's work is well worth, if you're sort of ready for a bit more meat and a bit more long form. Can you guys think of any others that you'd recommend to someone who's sort of starting out on the journey?
We've stolen a lot of my ideas there, but
sorry.
So Roger Scruton, a lot of his work deals with these things. I think he's one of my favorite thinkers on this stuff. Just even his book, How to Be Conservative, is very good.
Yeah,
but
good book.
He's got a lot of other stuff dealing with a lot of the fallacies of liberalism, fools, frauds, and firebrands. Is probably a bit long, but maybe some of his other stuff is good. Warren McIntyre's The Total State,
great book,
is a very good book. And one of the great things about that is it sort of gives you a short introduction to many other threads of thought or different thinkers in what we might call this the alternative right sort of space. I had someone else I was going to say. Who was that? I'll have to just Dieuwe could go. I'll see if I can think of it.
Yeah,
again.
I was going to say I could take the baton for a second. I would recommend some sort of more like shorter online content. People just like watch short videos. And the Lotus Eaters from the UK, we've mentioned Carl Benjamin, but it doesn't just have to be Carl Benjamin. The crew that he works with do great short videos. Warren McIntyre does as well, that we've mentioned. So that may be a really good entry point for people who are reconsidering, especially since Carl Benjamin is a recovering liberal himself. He used to be
that's right.
A liberal. That makes him an excellent entry point. And then, since Roger Scruton was mentioned as well, his documentary, Why Beauty Matters, you'd be able to find it somewhere on YouTube because the South Americans preserved it. It was only available with Portuguese subtitles hard-coded into it at one point because the BBC completely scrubbed it from the internet. So I'll repeat that, Why Beauty Matters. And that was probably one of the biggest eye-openers for me personally. Watching that did change my life. I'm not understating that.
Did you think of who it was, William?
Yeah, it was Sam Francis's book, The Managerial Revolution, which is another very good. It's a very long book, but actually very readable. And the great thing about it is that he's a conservative guy, but he's approaching conservatism from a sort of different angle, and he's doing the forbidden thing. He's using Marxist thinkers to sort of approach conservatism through some of the ways they think about things.
Yeah, that's great. Good call. One last thing I'll add to the mix is if you want to read a bit more about the tradition and history of the West, you can't go past a bit of Christopher Dawson. You'll have to actually get his books. They're reprints now. You'll have to get his books on Amazon and stuff. That they are available, but they are reprint versions. But well worth if you want to go that little bit deeper as well. And of course, we'd all say read some Edmund Burke if you haven't, or there's some good commentaries on Burke out there that are well worth reading too. Chaps, I think that's us, isn't it? So I guess the only thing left for me to do is to say thank you to both of you, Dieuwe and particularly William. It was great to have you actually on the show tonight, William, to have this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I did. I'm honoured to appear, and it was a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Dieuwe, thank you as always.
Thank you as well, and I enjoyed this, and it was great that we spoke recently about doing these shows with somebody else in the middle, and I think William's done a really great job here.
William, where can people follow your work?
Most of what I do is on Twitter. That's where I spend most of my day, on Twitter. I'm a political, so it's my name, William McGimpsey, at the Zeitgeist NZ. I'm a political commentator for Reality Check Radio as well. So I do commentaries on the news there, and I also appear with Dieuwe on a show, the Weekly Roundup on RCR. I also have a Substack where I occasionally write down some things, and just relevant for this conversation, you can read about my debate with James Lindsay on that Substack. So that's the Zeitgeist as well.
Dieuwe, remind everyone where they can follow your work.
Same places as always, on rightminds.nz, and my Twitter account as well, Dieuwe de Boer, or at rightmindsnz, and I'm on Telegram too. Fairly active there, and you feel free to get in touch with me. And of course, as William's mentioned, I am on Reality Check Radio as well.
Thanks again, folks, for tuning in. I was going to say Two Dispatches with Dieuwe, a little bit different. I might have to come up with another name, Dieuwe, the Dispatches Dialogues or something. But it was great to have you with us, as always. Don't forget, live by goodness, truth and beauty, not by lies. And we'll see you next time on Left Foot Media. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to support our work, you can do that by becoming a patron at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. The link is in today's show notes. And don't forget, live by goodness, truth and beauty, not by lies. And I'll see you next time on The Dispatches.